Tommy Rivera had been mopping the same parking lot for 3 years. Every night, same routine. Clock in at 11, mop the lot by midnight, clean the diner bathrooms at 1, take out the trash at 2, then spend the rest of his shift keeping things tidy until the morning crew showed up at 6. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid the rent on the tiny studio apartment above the diner, and his boss let him keep irregular hours when he needed to. At 28 years old, Tommy's life hadn't turned out the way he'd imagined. He dropped out of community college when his mom got sick, spent 2 years taking care of her before she passed, and never quite found his way back to the plans he'd made. Now he was just the night janitor at Ruby's diner, the guy people didn't really notice unless the bathrooms were dirty. But Tommy was okay with that. He'd learned a long time ago that being invisible had its advantages. People said things around him they wouldn't say otherwise. He saw things others missed. And when someone needed help, he was usually the first one there because he was paying attention when everyone else was looking away. It was just past midnight on a Tuesday when Tommy was pushing his mop bucket across the parking lot, working on the oil stain near the back fence. The night was clear and quiet, the kind of peaceful that Tommy actually enjoyed about the graveyard shift. No traffic, no crowds, just him and the stars and the rhythmic sound of his mop on pavement. Then the sky lit up. At first, Tommy thought it was a plane. A bright streak of light cutting across the darkness, moving fast from west to east. But planes didn't move like that, and they definitely didn't glow that shade of blue-white that hurt to look at directly. The streak got lower, closer, and Tommy realized with growing alarm that whatever it was going to hit ground somewhere nearby. The impact came with a sound like thunder, a deep boom that rattled the diner's windows and set off car alarms in the distance. Tommy saw the flash of light in the empty field behind the building, maybe 200 yards away past the back fence. Smoke or steam or something started rising from the impact site. Most people would have gone inside and called 911. That would have been the smart, safe thing to do. Tommy's hand even went to his pocket where he kept his phone. But something made him hesitate. What if someone was hurt? What if they needed help right now, and waiting for emergency services meant they'd die before anyone got there? Tommy grabbed the heavy-duty flashlight he kept in his cleaning cart and headed for the back fence. It was chain link, not too hard to climb, and he was over it in seconds despite not being in the best shape. His heart pounded as he jogged across the field, the flashlight beam bouncing ahead of him. The crater wasn't huge, maybe 15 feet across, but it was definitely a crater. The grass around it was scorched, and there was this weird smell in the air, not exactly burning, but something sharper, almost like ozone after a lightning strike. In the center of the crater lay what Tommy had assumed would be a chunk of meteorite or space debris. It wasn't. It was a person. A young woman, lying unconscious in the dirt. Tommy's brain stuttered trying to process what he was seeing. People didn't fall from the sky. That wasn't a thing that happened. But there she was, curled on her side, definitely human-shaped, definitely real. He slid down into the crater, his shoes slipping on the loose dirt, and knelt beside her. She was young, maybe 19 or 20, with dark hair that fell past her shoulders. But everything else about her was strange. Her clothes looked like they were made of metal, except they moved like fabric, shifting and rippling in a way that regular cloth didn't. The material had this liquid quality to it, like mercury shaped into a bodysuit. And her skin, when Tommy shined his flashlight on her face, her skin had this faint shimmer to it, almost like very fine glitter was embedded just under the surface. Tommy reached out carefully and touched her neck, checking for a pulse. Her skin was warm, warmer than it should be, and her pulse was there but faster than normal, racing like she'd just run a marathon. She was breathing, at least. Shallow breaths, but steady. "Hey," Tommy said, gently shaking her shoulder. "Hey, can you hear me? Are you okay?" No response. She was completely out. Tommy looked around the crater, searching for anything that might explain this. There was no wreckage, no pieces of a vehicle or escape pod or whatever she might have been in. Just her, lying in the dirt, dressed in impossible clothes. He should call an ambulance. He should call the police. He should definitely tell someone official about this because this was way above his pay grade. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the way those car alarms were still going off in the distance, or the way he could see lights coming on in houses nearby, people waking up and looking outside to see what had caused that boom. If he called 911, this place would be swarming with emergency services in minutes. And then what? They'd take her away, ask questions Tommy couldn't answer, probably treat her like a threat or a science experiment. The woman, girl, really, she looked so young, made a small sound, something between a whimper and a groan. Her eyes moved beneath her closed eyelids, like she was dreaming or trying to wake up. Tommy made a decision that was probably stupid, definitely reckless, and completely in character for who he'd always been. He scooped her up in his arms. She was lighter than he expected, which was good because Tommy wasn't exactly built like a bodybuilder. Her head lolled against his shoulder, and up close he could see that she had small cuts on her face and arms, places where she'd hit the ground or gotten scraped by debris. Getting out of the crater while carrying someone was harder than getting in had been. Tommy slipped twice, nearly dropped her once, but finally managed to scramble up to ground level. He could hear sirens now, still distant but getting closer. Someone had definitely called about the impact. He needed to move. The field had never seemed longer. Tommy walked as fast as he could without jostling her too much, his arms burning from the effort, sweat dripping down his face despite the cool night air. By the time he reached the fence, his legs were shaking. Getting over the fence while carrying her was impossible, so he had to lay her down carefully, climb over, then reach back and pull her through the gap at the bottom where the chain link had come loose from its post years ago. His apartment entrance was around the back of the diner, up a rickety external staircase that his landlord kept promising to fix. Tommy carried the unconscious woman up those stairs, fumbled with his keys, and finally got the door open. He laid her down on his couch, a beat-up thing he'd found on the street and cleaned up, and stood there for a moment, breathing hard, trying to figure out what the hell he'd just done. The sirens were louder now. Through his window, Tommy could see flashing lights in the distance, emergency vehicles heading toward the field. They'd find the crater, but they wouldn't find her. He'd made sure of that. Tommy grabbed his first aid kit from under the bathroom sink. It wasn't much, some bandages, antiseptic, pain relievers, the basics. He'd learned basic first aid when his mom was sick, enough to handle minor emergencies. This felt like it might be a major emergency, but it was all he had. Tommy's brain stuttered trying to process what he was seeing. People didn't fall from the sky. That wasn't a thing that happened. But there she was, curled on her side, definitely human-shaped, definitely real. He slid down into the crater, his shoes slipping on the loose dirt, and knelt beside her. She was young, maybe 19 or 20, with dark hair that fell past her shoulders. But everything else about her was strange. Her clothes looked like they were made of metal, except they moved like fabric, shifting and rippling in a way that regular cloth didn't. The material had this liquid quality to it, like mercury shaped into a bodysuit. And her skin, when Tommy shined his flashlight on her face, her skin had this faint shimmer to it, almost like very fine glitter was embedded just under the surface. Tommy reached out carefully and touched her neck, checking for a pulse. Her skin was warm, warmer than it should be, and her pulse was there but faster than normal, racing like she'd just run a marathon. She was breathing, at least. Shallow breaths, but steady. "Hey," Tommy said, gently shaking her shoulder. "Hey, can you hear me? Are you okay?" No response. She was completely out. Tommy looked around the crater, searching for anything that might explain this. There was no wreckage, no pieces of a vehicle or escape pod or whatever she might have been in. Just her, lying in the dirt, dressed in impossible clothes. He should call an ambulance. He should call the police. He should definitely tell someone official about this because this was way above his pay grade. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the way those car alarms were still going off in the distance, or the way he could see lights coming on in houses nearby, people waking up and looking outside to see what had caused that boom. If he called 911, this place would be swarming with emergency services in minutes. And then what? They'd take her away, ask questions Tommy couldn't answer, probably treat her like a threat or a science experiment. The woman, girl, really, she looked so young, made a small sound, something between a whimper and a groan. Her eyes moved beneath her closed eyelids, like she was dreaming or trying to wake up. Tommy made a decision that was probably stupid, definitely reckless, and completely in character for who he'd always been. He scooped her up in his arms. She was lighter than he expected, which was good because Tommy wasn't exactly built like a bodybuilder. Her head lolled against his shoulder, and up close he could see that she had small cuts on her face and arms, places where she'd hit the ground or gotten scraped by debris. Getting out of the crater while carrying someone was harder than getting in had been. Tommy slipped twice, nearly dropped her once, but finally managed to scramble up to ground level. He could hear sirens now, still distant but getting closer. Someone had definitely called about the impact. He needed to move. The field had never seemed longer. Tommy walked as fast as he could without jostling her too much, his arms burning from the effort, sweat dripping down his face despite the cool night air. By the time he reached the fence, his legs were shaking. Getting over the fence while carrying her was impossible, so he had to lay her down carefully, climb over, then reach back and pull her through the gap at the bottom where the chain link had come loose from its post years ago. His apartment entrance was around the back of the diner, up a rickety external staircase that his landlord kept promising to fix. Tommy carried the unconscious woman up those stairs, fumbled with his keys, and finally got the door open. He laid her down on his couch, a beat-up thing he'd found on the street and cleaned up, and stood there for a moment, breathing hard, trying to figure out what the hell he'd just done. The sirens were louder now. Through his window, Tommy could see flashing lights in the distance, emergency vehicles heading toward the field. They'd find the crater, but they wouldn't find her. He'd made sure of that. Tommy grabbed his first aid kit from under the bathroom sink. It wasn't much, some bandages, antiseptic, pain relievers, the basics. He'd learned basic first aid when his mom was sick, enough to handle minor emergencies. This felt like it might be a major emergency, but it was all he had. He cleaned the cuts on her face and arms as gently as he could. The antiseptic made her twitch and whimper, but she didn't wake up. Her strange clothes were torn in a few places, and underneath he could see more cuts and what looked like bruises forming. He bandaged what he could reach, covered her with his spare blanket, and then just sat on the floor next to the couch, watching her breathe. What was he supposed to do now? He couldn't take her to a hospital without questions he couldn't answer. He couldn't call the police without potentially getting her, and himself, in serious trouble. He definitely couldn't explain to anyone how a woman in liquid metal clothes had crashed in a field behind his work and he decided to bring her to his apartment instead of, doing anything sensible. The woman's eyes moved again, and this time they started to open. Tommy leaned forward, his heart racing. "Hey," he said softly. "Take it easy. You're safe. You're in my apartment. You crashed in a field, and I brought you here. Can you understand me?" Her eyes opened fully, and Tommy caught his breath. They were violet. Actually violet, like purple blue, a color human eyes just didn't come in naturally. She looked at him with those impossible eyes, confusion and fear written across her face. Her mouth moved, and sound came out, but it wasn't any language Tommy had ever heard. It was musical almost, with tones and rhythms that seemed too complex for human vocal cords. "I don't understand," Tommy said, speaking slowly. "Do you speak English? Can you tell me what happened?" More of the strange language. She tried to sit up, winced in pain, and Tommy gently pushed her back down. "Whoa, easy. You're hurt. Just rest, okay? We'll figure this out." She stared at him, those violet eyes searching his face. Then, slowly, she raised one hand and pointed at herself. "Nina," she said, the word heavily accented but recognizable. "Nina." "Nina," Tommy repeated, smiling despite the insanity of the situation. "Okay, Nina. I'm Tommy. You're safe here. I promise." She repeated his name, Tommy, testing how it sounded. Then she laid back on the couch, exhaustion clear on her face, and closed her eyes again. Tommy sat on the floor and watched her sleep, wondering what he'd gotten himself into. Outside, he could hear more sirens, see more lights flashing. They were searching the field, probably finding the crater, definitely asking questions about what had crashed there. But they wouldn't find her. Because Tommy Rivera, invisible night shift janitor who nobody really noticed, had decided to help someone who fell from the sky. He didn't know who she was, where she came from, or why she'd crashed on Earth. He just knew she needed help. And Tommy had never been able to walk away from someone who needed help. The first morning after Nina crashed, Tommy called in sick to work for the first time in 2 years. His boss wasn't happy, but Tommy didn't know what else to do. He couldn't leave Nina alone in his apartment when she could barely stand up, didn't speak the language, and had no idea where she was or what anything around her meant. She woke up around 9, and Tommy watched as she processed her surroundings with wide, confused eyes. The violet color was still there, still impossible, and Tommy had spent half the night convincing himself he hadn't imagined it. She sat up slowly, wincing at the pain from her injuries, and looked around his tiny studio apartment like she was seeing an alien world. Which, Tommy realized, she probably was. "Morning," Tommy said from where he sat at his small kitchen table. He'd made coffee and toast, normal human things, though he had no idea if she could even eat human food. "How are you feeling?" Nina looked at him, recognition dawning on her face. "Tommy," she said, and he was surprised at how much clearer her pronunciation was than last night. She pointed at herself. "Nina." "Yeah," Tommy smiled. "You remember. That's good. Are you hungry?" He made eating gestures, pointing at the toast. Nina watched him carefully, then nodded. Tommy brought over the plate, and she picked up the toast like she'd never seen bread before, examining it from different angles. When she finally took a bite, her expression suggested she found it bland but edible. She ate both slices quickly, like she was starving. Over the next hour, Tommy tried to communicate through gestures and simple words. He pointed at things, table, chair, window, door, and said the words clearly. Nina repeated them, her pronunciation improving rapidly with each attempt. She was a quick learner, picking up patterns faster than should be possible. When he showed her the bathroom, she stared at the toilet and sink like they were complex machinery. Tommy had to demonstrate how to use the faucet, how to flush, how the shower worked. She seemed amazed by running water, holding her hand under the stream for a long time, watching it flow. The TV completely baffled her. When Tommy turned it on to the morning news, she jumped back, staring at the moving images like they might attack her. He explained it was just pictures, stories, information, but she kept a wary distance from the screen. What really got to Tommy was when she tried to explain where she came from. She grabbed a pen and paper, after Tommy showed her what they were, and started drawing. She drew what looked like stars, then a circle that might be a planet. She drew stick figures that Tommy assumed were people, then drew lines between them suggesting conflict or fighting. She pointed at the drawing, then at herself, her expression scared and sad. "You were running from something," Tommy said quietly. "Someone was chasing you. Trying to hurt you." Nina seemed to understand the tone if not all the words. She nodded vigorously, then made a gesture like something exploding. She pointed up at the ceiling, meaning sky or space, then made a falling motion with her hand, ending with a crash gesture. "Your ship crashed," Tommy interpreted. "You were escaping, and your ship broke, and you crashed here." Another nod. Then she did something that broke Tommy's heart. She put her face in her hands and her shoulders shook. She wasn't making sound, but she was clearly crying. This young woman who'd fallen from the stars was sitting in his cheap apartment, wearing her strange liquid metal clothes, crying silently into her hands. Tommy didn't think. He just moved to sit beside her on the couch and awkwardly patted her shoulder. "Hey, it's okay. You're safe here. I won't let anyone hurt you." She looked up at him with those violet eyes full of tears and said something in her language. Tommy didn't understand the words, but he understood the meaning. "Thank you." By the second day, Tommy had to go back to work or risk losing his job. He showed Nina how to lock the door from the inside, made her promise to stay quiet and not open the door for anyone. He left his phone with her, after showing her how to call him if there was an emergency, and went to his shift feeling anxious the entire time. When he got back at 7 in the morning, Nina was sitting on the couch watching TV with the sound muted, studying how the people moved and spoke. She'd figured out how to change channels and had apparently spent the night absorbing human behavior through television. It wasn't the best education, but Tommy had to admire her determination. Her English was noticeably better. She greeted him with "Hello, Tommy. You working?" The grammar was off, but the words were clear. "Yeah, I was working," Tommy confirmed, impressed. "You've been practicing." "TV teaching," Nina said, pointing at the screen. Many words. Many things to learn. Over the next few days, they fell into a strange routine. Tommy would work his night shift, come home in the morning, sleep for a few hours while Nina watched TV or looked through the few books he owned. Then they'd spend the afternoon together, with Tommy teaching her English more formally and Nina teaching him a few words of her language in return. He learned that her real name was much longer and more complex than Nina, but she'd chosen that as her Earth name because Tommy could pronounce it. She was from somewhere far away. She kept pointing up and making expansive gestures that suggested vast distances. She was important somehow, though Tommy couldn't figure out exactly how. She kept drawing pictures of herself surrounded by other figures who seemed to be bowing or respecting her in some way. But mostly, she seemed young and scared and far from home. Tommy's budget was already tight before Nina arrived, and now it was stretched to the breaking point. He was feeding 2 people on a salary meant for 1, and Nina's appetite suggested she needed more calories than the average person. Tommy started skipping meals, telling Nina he'd eaten at work or wasn't hungry. She'd look at him with those perceptive violet eyes like she knew he was lying, but she didn't call him out on it. When Nina's strange clothes started to malfunction, the liquid metal material flickering and losing its shimmer, Tommy realized she needed regular clothes. He couldn't exactly take her shopping, so he went to the thrift store on his day off and bought her some basics: jeans, t-shirts, a hoodie, sneakers. He spent money he couldn't afford, money that was supposed to go toward next month's rent, but seeing Nina's face light up when she tried on the clothes made it worth it. She modeled the jeans and t-shirt for him, spinning around in his tiny apartment, and said, "I am looking normal? Like Earth person?" You look great, Tommy assured her. Very normal. No one would know you're not from here. Except for the eyes, but she'd started wearing his old sunglasses when he suggested it, even indoors. She thought they were funner looking, but she understood they helped hide what made her different. Tommy learned that making Nina laugh was his new favorite thing. His jokes were terrible, puns and dad jokes that made most people groan, but Nina found them hilarious, maybe because she was still learning English and the wordplay delighted her. When he told her, "I'm reading a book about anti-gravity, it's impossible to put down," she laughed so hard she nearly fell off the couch, even though Tommy was pretty sure she didn't fully understand what anti-gravity meant. "Why you so kind?" Nina asked him one afternoon. They were sitting on his fire escape, Tommy's version of a balcony, watching the street below. "You not know me. I am stranger. Maybe dangerous. But you help. Why?" Tommy thought about it. "I don't know. It's just, you needed help. When someone needs help, you help them. That's just what you do." "Not all humans this way," Nina observed. She'd been watching TV, after all, and had seen plenty of examples of humans being cruel or selfish. Many humans not help. Many humans hurt others. "Yeah," Tommy admitted. "There's a lot of that. But there's also a lot of good people. People who care, who try to make things better. I'm not special or anything. I'm just, me. A janitor who mops floors and takes out trash. But I can still help when someone needs it." Nina looked at him for a long moment. "Where I from, people have much power. Much importance. Big titles, big responsibilities. But many of them." She struggled for the words, "Many of them have small hearts. You have no power, no big title. But you have big heart. Very big." Tommy felt his face flush. He wasn't used to compliments, especially not ones that seemed so sincere. "It's nothing. Really." "Not nothing," Nina insisted. "Everything." That night, while Tommy was at work, everything changed. He got a text from Nina on his phone. She'd learned to text surprisingly quickly, that just said, "Danger. Come home." Tommy's heart stopped. He abandoned his mop bucket mid-floor and ran, ignoring his boss yelling after him about responsibility. He took the back stairs two at a time, his keys already in his hand. The apartment door was locked, which was good. Tommy opened it and found Nina pressed against the far wall, her strange clothes back on. Apparently they still worked well enough when she needed them to, and her eyes wide with fear. "What happened?" Tommy asked, closing and locking the door behind him. Nina pointed at the window. 3 people. Outside. Watching building. Looking for me. They followed, how you say, followed signal from my clothes. They find me. Tommy went to the window carefully and looked down at the street. 3 figures stood in the shadows across the road, and even from this distance, Tommy could tell something was wrong with them. They moved in a way that wasn't quite human, too fluid, too coordinated. They were definitely watching his building. "They come soon," Nina whispered. "Come to take me. Or kill me. They not care which." Tommy looked at this young woman who'd fallen from the sky, who he'd been protecting for less than a week, who'd become something like a friend despite everything that should have made friendship impossible. He looked at her fear, her trust in him despite having every reason not to trust anyone. And Tommy made a decision. He grabbed the baseball bat he kept by the door, a holdover from the one time someone had tried to rob the diner on his shift, and moved to stand between Nina and the door. "They'll have to go through me first," he said. Nina stared at him. "Tommy, no. They have weapons. Technology. They are trained fighters. You are." "I'm the guy who's not letting anyone hurt you," Tommy interrupted. "I don't care who they are or what they have. They want you, they deal with me first." He saw something change in Nina's expression. Something like wonder, like she couldn't quite believe what she was seeing. She opened her mouth to argue more, but then they both heard it, footsteps on the external stairs, heavy and deliberate. The assassins had arrived. And Tommy Rivera, minimum-wage janitor with a baseball bat and no combat training whatsoever, prepared to do something incredibly brave and incredibly stupid. Because that's what you did when someone you cared about was in danger. You stood between them and the threat, no matter how outmatched you were. You helped. Even when it was terrifying. Even when it was dangerous. Even when it might cost you everything. You helped. The first assassin came through the door like it wasn't even there. Tommy heard a sound like metal tearing, and suddenly the lock he'd trusted to keep them safe was just scattered pieces on the floor. The figure that stepped through was humanoid but wrong in ways Tommy's brain struggled to process. It moved too smoothly, like it was gliding instead of walking, and in the dim light of his apartment, Tommy could see its eyes glowing a faint red. Tommy swung his baseball bat with everything he had. The assassin caught it one-handed without even looking, like Tommy had thrown a paper airplane instead of a wooden bat moving at full speed. The creature, Tommy couldn't think of it as a person, yanked the bat from his grip and tossed it aside like garbage. Then its hand shot out and grabbed Tommy by the throat, lifting him off his feet. Tommy couldn't breathe. His hands clawed at the iron grip around his neck, his legs kicking uselessly in the air. Spots danced in his vision. Through the haze of oxygen deprivation, he saw the other two assassins enter his apartment, moving past him toward where Nina stood against the far wall. No, Tommy tried to say, but nothing came out except a wheeze. He saw Nina's face, saw the anguish there as she watched him struggling. She shouted something in her language, desperate and commanding, but the assassins ignored her. One of them raised what looked like a weapon, sleek and alien, pointing it directly at Nina's chest. Tommy's vision was going dark. He was dying in his own apartment, and Nina was about to die too, and he'd failed. He'd tried to protect her and failed, and they were both going to. Nina's hand went to her wrist, to a band that Tommy had assumed was jewelry. She pressed something on it, and the band lit up with light that was too bright to look at directly. She spoke rapidly into the device, her voice carrying an authority Tommy had never heard from her before. The assassin holding Tommy suddenly released him. Tommy collapsed to the floor, gasping and coughing, his throat on fire. Through watering eyes, he saw all three assassins turn to look at Nina, and for the first time, they seemed uncertain. Nina was still speaking into her wrist device, and now Tommy could hear something in the distance. A sound like thunder, getting rapidly closer. The windows of his apartment suddenly blazed with light from outside, not normal light, but something blue-white and intense, like looking at a welding torch. The ceiling of Tommy's apartment exploded. Not with fire or debris, but with pure energy that somehow didn't damage anything. It just created an opening where solid matter had been seconds before. Figures descended through the opening on beams of light, moving with military precision. They were wearing armor that looked like it was made from the same material as Nina's clothes, flowing and liquid but somehow solid. They carried weapons that hummed with contained power. The three assassins tried to fight. It was over in seconds. Tommy watched from the floor, still struggling to breathe, as the armored figures moved with impossible speed and coordination. The assassins were fast and dangerous, but these newcomers were faster. There were flashes of energy, sounds like thunder compressed into milliseconds, and then all three assassins were on the ground, not moving, probably not alive. The apartment went quiet except for Tommy's ragged breathing and the hum of alien technology. One of the armored figures approached Nina and immediately dropped to one knee, head bowed. Then another did the same. Then all of them, a dozen alien warriors in advanced armor, kneeling before the young woman Tommy had been teaching to use a television remote. Nina spoke to them in her language, her voice different now. Not the hesitant, scared tone Tommy had grown used to, but something commanding and absolute. The voice of someone used to being obeyed without question. The warriors responded in unison, their voices mixing into something that sounded almost like a chant. Then Nina turned to Tommy, and her expression shifted. The commanding presence faltered, and for a moment she looked like the scared girl who'd been crying on his couch just days ago. She ran to him, dropping to her knees beside where he lay on the floor. Tommy, are you okay? Her hands hovered over him, uncertain where to touch, clearly wanting to help but afraid of hurting him more. I'm so sorry. This is my fault. All my fault. Tommy tried to speak, but his throat felt crushed. He managed a weak cough, and pain shot through his neck. One of the armored figures approached, moving with careful deference. It spoke to Nina in their language, gesturing to Tommy. Nina responded sharply, pointing at Tommy with clear command. The warrior nodded and knelt beside Tommy, pulling out a device that looked like a flashlight merged with a medical scanner. The device passed over Tommy's throat, and suddenly the pain lessened. He could feel something happening, tissue repairing, swelling reducing, damage being undone by technology that was basically magic as far as Tommy understood. Within minutes, he could breathe normally again, though his throat still felt bruised. What? Tommy croaked, then cleared his throat and tried again. What the hell is going on? Nina looked at him with those violet eyes full of guilt and sadness. I did not tell you truth. Not full truth. I am sorry, Tommy. So sorry. The other warriors had secured the apartment, posting guards at the door and the hole in the ceiling. They moved with perfect military efficiency, but Tommy noticed they all kept glancing at Nina, waiting for orders or permission or something. Nina, Tommy said, his voice still rough, who are you? I mean, who are you really? Nina took a deep breath. Over the past few days, her English had improved dramatically, and now she spoke in nearly complete sentences, though her accent made some words hard to understand. My real name is very long. In your language, it is something like Seraphina. Queen Seraphina of the Celestial Imperium. I rule over 200 worlds and more than 50 billion of my people. Tommy stared at her. Then he started laughing, which hurt his damaged throat, but he couldn't help it. The absurdity of it all, him, a janitor, protecting an alien queen in his studio apartment above a diner. Teaching her to use a TV remote. Sharing his dollar store ramen with literal royalty from space. You're a queen, Tommy said flatly. You're an actual queen of an actual empire, and I've been making you sleep on my couch. Best couch I ever sleep on, Nina, Seraphina, said seriously. Most comfortable because it came with kindness. One of the warriors spoke to Nina again, more urgently this time. She responded with clear authority, gesturing around the apartment. The warrior bowed and left through the hole in the ceiling, presumably to carry out whatever orders she'd given. They want me to come home, Nina explained to Tommy. There is how do you say, a coup? Someone trying to take my throne. My cousin, I think. He sent assassins to kill me before I could return and stop him. My ship was sabotaged. I crashed here. And you didn't tell me you were a queen because? Because I did not know if I could trust you, Nina said honestly. Everyone I know wants something from me. Power, influence, favors, wealth. When I am Queen Seraphina, no one sees me. They see my crown, my throne, my empire. But when I am Nina, just Nina who crashed in a field, you saw me. Just me. You helped me not because I am important, but because I needed help. She looked around his tiny apartment, at the cheap furniture and the hole in the ceiling and the unconscious or dead assassins on his floor. This place, this week with you, is the first time in my life someone cared about me and not about what I could do for them. You shared your food even when you did not have enough. You spent money you needed for yourself to buy me clothes. You stood against trained killers with only a stick to protect me. Baseball bat, Tommy corrected weakly. You were willing to die for Nina, Seraphina said, and tears were running down her face now. Not for Queen Seraphina. Not for the ruler of the Celestial Imperium. For Nina, the scared girl who fell from the sky. No one has ever done that for me. No one. Another warrior approached and spoke urgently. Nina, no, Seraphina, responded with a sharp command. The warrior bowed and left. They want to take me home now, Seraphina explained. There is much happening. My cousin has declared himself emperor. Many of my loyal people are being imprisoned or killed. I must return to stop him, to reclaim my throne. Then you should go, Tommy said, trying to stand up. Seraphina and one of the warriors helped him to his feet. You're a queen. You've got billions of people depending on you. You can't stay here hiding in my apartment. Come with me, Seraphina said suddenly. Come to my world. You saved my life, Tommy. By our laws, you are entitled to great reward. Wealth beyond measure. A title, lands, a position in my court. Anything you want, it is yours. Tommy looked around his apartment. The crappy furniture, the peeling wallpaper, the hole in the ceiling that his landlord was going to absolutely lose his mind about. His entire life was minimum wage and struggle, invisible work that nobody appreciated, loneliness in a studio apartment that was too expensive for what it offered. I can't, he said. Seraphina looked shocked. But why? Here you have nothing. On my world, you would have everything. You would never struggle again, never be alone, never be overlooked or dismissed. I'm just a janitor, Tommy said. I mop floors. I take out trash. I belong here, doing that. What would I do in an alien empire? I don't know anything about politics or running planets or whatever it is queens do. I'd just be lost. More lost than you were when you crashed here. You would not be lost, Seraphina insisted. You would be with me. I would ensure. And that's why I can't go, Tommy interrupted gently. You're grateful right now. You feel like you owe me. But Nina, when you get back to being Queen Seraphina full-time, with all those responsibilities and pressures, you're not going to need a janitor from Earth following you around. You're going to need advisors and generals and people who actually know what they're doing. You sell yourself short, Seraphina said, almost angry now. You think because you clean floors that you have nothing to offer? You saved my life. More than that, you showed me kindness without wanting anything in return. That is the rarest, most valuable thing in the universe. Please, Tommy. come with me. Tommy was tempted. God, was he tempted? To leave behind his dead-end job, his tiny apartment, his invisible life. To see alien worlds, to never worry about money again, to be important for once. But he shook his head. If you really want to thank me, Tommy said, then remember what you learned here. Remember that the most important things aren't power or wealth or fancy technology. It's kindness. It's helping people who need help. It's seeing people as people, not as what they can do for you. He looked around at the alien warriors, at the impossible technology, at the hole in his ceiling that revealed stars above. You're going back to rule an empire. Billions of people depending on your decisions. Don't rule like the cousin who tried to kill you. Don't make it all about power and control. Rule like someone who learned from a janitor that sometimes the simplest answer is the right one. That kindness matters more than anything else. Serafina was crying openly now. She stepped forward and hugged Tommy, fierce and desperate. I will remember, she whispered. I will never forget. And I will return. When the crisis is over, when my empire is stable, I will come back to see you. I promise. I'll be here, Tommy said, patting her back awkwardly. Mopping the diner parking lot, probably. They pulled apart, and Serafina spoke to her guards in their language. They bowed and began preparing to leave. One of them pulled out a device and pointed it at the hole in the ceiling. The ceiling simply reformed. Like the hole had never been there. Another warrior pointed a similar device at the bodies of the assassins, and they dissolved into nothing, no trace left behind. Serafina was the last to go. She stood at Tommy's door, back in her liquid metal clothes that now seemed to fit her differently, more like armor than a garment. She looked every inch the alien queen now, powerful and commanding. Thank you, Tommy Rivera, she said formally. For saving the life of Queen Serafina of the Celestial Imperium. Your kindness will be remembered in our histories, and Earth will be under our protection for as long as my line rules. Then she smiled, and she was Nina again for just a moment. And thank you for teaching me about TV and terrible jokes and what it means to have a friend. She stepped through the door and was gone, her guards following. Tommy heard footsteps on the stairs, then that sound like thunder again, and through his now-repaired window he saw lights rising into the sky. Within seconds, they were gone. Tommy stood alone in his apartment. The clock said it was 3 a.m. He had to be back at work in 7 hours. His throat still hurt. His apartment looked the same as it always had, except cleaner. The alien technology had apparently tied it up while fixing his ceiling. He laughed, a sound that was half sob. He'd just said goodbye to an alien queen. A woman, a being, he'd known for less than a week but who had somehow become important to him. She was gone now, back to her empire and her throne and her life that was completely separate from his. Tommy went to his window and looked up at the stars. Somewhere up there, Nina, Serafina, was fighting to reclaim her throne. And somehow, a janitor from Earth had taught her something she thought was valuable enough to remember. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that mattered more than he knew. Tommy went back to his couch, sat down where Nina had slept for the past several days, and closed his eyes. In a few hours, he'd go back to mopping floors and taking out trash and being invisible. But he'd always know that for 1 week, he'd protected a queen. And she told him his kindness was the most valuable thing in the universe. That was something nobody could take away. 3 days later, Tommy woke up to find his apartment surrounded by what looked like an invisible force field. He could see the shimmer in the air when sunlight hit it at certain angles, and when he tried to leave for work, one of Serafina's guards, now dressed in human clothes but still obviously not human, politely but firmly told him that the queen had ordered him to rest and recover. I'm fine, Tommy protested, even though his throat still felt tender and his whole body ached from the fight. I need to work. I've already missed 3 days. My boss is going to fire me. The guard, who had introduced himself with a name Tommy couldn't pronounce, simply said, the queen has compensated your employer for your absence. You are not required to work until you are fully healed. Tommy wanted to argue more, but then Serafina herself arrived, stepping out of thin air, some kind of teleportation technology that made Tommy's head hurt to think about. She was still wearing her liquid metal clothes, but she'd modified them somehow to look more like a fancy business suit. She looked tired, with dark circles under her eyes that even her alien biology couldn't hide. You look terrible, Tommy said before he could stop himself. Serafina laughed, a sound that seemed to surprise her guards. I have been awake for 60 hours dealing with my cousin's coup attempt. But I wanted to see you before I had to return permanently. 60 hours? Nina, you need to sleep. I will sleep when the crisis is over, she said, but she swayed slightly on her feet. Tommy grabbed her arm to steady her, and her guards tensed, hands moving toward weapons. Serafina waved them off with a sharp command. "Come on," Tommy said, guiding her toward his couch. "You can't rule an empire if you collapse from exhaustion. Sit down for 10 minutes at least." To his surprise and her guard's shock, Serafina let him lead her to the couch. She sat down heavily, and for a moment, she just looked like Nina again, young, tired, overwhelmed. "Tell me what's happening," Tommy said, sitting in his desk chair across from her. "With your empire. Is it bad?" Serafina was quiet for a moment, then started speaking. At first, Tommy thought she was going to give him some diplomatic, carefully worded explanation. But instead, she told him the truth, raw and unfiltered. "My cousin Aldrich declared himself emperor 3 days after my ship crashed. He told everyone I was dead, killed in an accident. He had support from several noble houses who prefer his traditional approach to rule. My people are divided. Some believe his lies. Others know the truth but are too afraid to speak out because Aldrich has been executing anyone he considers disloyal." She rubbed her eyes, and Tommy noticed her hands were shaking slightly. "I have loyal forces, but they are scattered. I have been coordinating from my flagship in orbit around your planet, trying to gather support, trying to prevent full civil war. But it is difficult. Many of my people do not believe I am really alive. They think my messages are faked, that my cousin's claim is legitimate." "Can't you just show yourself?" Tommy asked. "Like, do a live broadcast or something?" "I have," Serafina said. "But Aldrich's people claim the broadcasts are sophisticated forgeries. In my empire, we have technology that can create perfect replicas of people, make them say anything. Unless I appear in person before the Imperial Council, many will not believe I am truly alive." "So appear before them," Tommy said. "Go to this council, prove you're alive, take back your throne." Serafina looked at him with an expression that was part frustration, part admiration. "You make it sound so simple. But Aldrich controls the capital. The Imperial Council meets in the palace, which is now his stronghold. If I go there, I walk into a trap. He will try to kill me again, and this time he will succeed because he controls the military forces around the palace. So you need to get more people on your side before you can confront him directly," Tommy said. "Build up your support until you're strong enough to take back the capital." "Yes," Serafina agreed. "Which is what I have been doing. But it is taking time, and every day Aldrich consolidates his power, making it harder to remove him. And..." She paused, looking away. "And I am realizing how much of my empire was built on fear and tradition rather than genuine loyalty. Many of my people serve whoever holds power, not because they believe in them but because that is how our society has always functioned." Tommy leaned forward. "Nina, can I ask you something?" "Of course. What kind of ruler were you? Before all this happened, I mean. What was your empire like?" Serafina was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was small. "Honest answer? I do not know. I was trained to rule from childhood. I learned statecraft, military strategy, economics, diplomacy. I made decisions that affected billions of lives. But I never asked myself if those decisions were actually good for my people, or just traditional. Expected. What a ruler was supposed to do." She looked at Tommy. "In my empire, we conquer. We expand. We demonstrate power to maintain order. That is how it has always been. The Celestial Imperium has existed for 5,000 years, and for 5,000 years, we have ruled the same way. I never questioned it because questioning tradition is not what rulers do." "But," Tommy prompted. "But I spent a week living in your tiny apartment, eating your simple food, watching your television programs. I saw how you live, not with wealth or power, but with kindness. You helped me not because it benefited you, but because I needed help. And I keep thinking, what if I ruled that way? What if instead of conquering and controlling, I focused on helping? On caring for my people the way you cared for me?" She laughed, but it sounded bitter. "My advisors would say I am being naive. That you cannot run an empire on kindness. That power is the only thing that maintains order across hundreds of worlds. And maybe they are right. Maybe my week on Earth made me soft, made me forget the realities of ruling. Or maybe," Tommy said carefully, "your week on Earth showed you what your empire was missing. Nina, I don't know anything about running an empire. I can barely manage my own life. But I know that people respond to genuine care a lot better than they respond to fear. Maybe your people aren't loyal to you because they haven't seen a reason to be loyal beyond, this is how we've always done things. Serafina looked at him, and Tommy saw something shift in her expression. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that maybe this crisis is also an opportunity, Tommy said. Your cousin represents the old way, rule through power and fear and tradition. You could represent something new. Rule through actually caring about your people. Not as resources or subjects, but as people who deserve to be helped and protected. That is idealistic, Serafina said, but she didn't sound dismissive. She sounded thoughtful. Yeah, it is, Tommy agreed. But you asked me what I thought, and that's what I think. You've got a chance to change your empire. To make it better. Don't waste it trying to go back to exactly how things were before. One of Serafina's guards approached and spoke urgently in their language. Serafina responded, then turned back to Tommy. I have to go. There is a situation developing on one of the border worlds that needs my attention. She stood, and Tommy stood with her. Will I see you again? He asked. Or is this goodbye for real this time? Serafina took his hands in hers. Her skin was warmer than human skin, and Tommy could feel a slight tingle, like static electricity. Tommy Rivera, by the laws of my people, I owe you a life debt. You saved my life at risk to your own. That creates an obligation that cannot be dismissed. But beyond legal obligation, you have become my friend. The only true friend I have ever had. I will return, I promise. When this crisis is over, when my empire is stable, I will come back. And if you don't? Tommy asked. If things go wrong and your cousin wins? Then I will die knowing that I spent 1 week of my life being truly cared for by someone who expected nothing in return, Serafina said. That is more than most rulers ever experience. She squeezed his hands, then let go. I am going to try what you suggested. Not just take back my throne, but change how I rule. Build an empire based on care rather than fear. It will be difficult. Many will resist. But if it works. She smiled. If it works, it will be because a janitor from Earth taught me that kindness is not weakness. It is strength. She turned to leave, then paused and looked back. Oh, and Tommy? I have left you something. A gift, though you will probably try to refuse it because you are stubborn about accepting help. But please, just this once, accept it. Before Tommy could ask what she meant, Serafina and her guards vanished, teleporting away in a shimmer of light. Tommy looked around his apartment, searching for whatever gift she'd mentioned. At first, he didn't see anything different. Then he noticed an envelope on his kitchen counter, made of material that looked like paper but felt more like fabric. Inside was a letter written in perfect English. Tommy. You have given me more than you know. The least I can do is ensure you are cared for as you cared for me. Your employer has been compensated for a year of your wages. Your apartment's rent has been paid for 5 years. A medical account has been established in your name with enough funds for any health needs you may have. I know you will protest this. You will say it is too much, that you did not help me for reward. But please understand, this is not payment. Payment would imply a transaction, that your kindness had a price. This is simply me ensuring that the person who saved my life does not have to struggle to survive. It is what friends do for each other. Also, I have taken the liberty of repairing your ceiling properly. With gratitude and affection, Serafina, Nina. Tommy read the letter 3 times. A year of wages. 5 years of rent. Medical care. It was more money than Tommy had ever had in his life, more security than he'd known since before his mom got sick. He should have felt grateful. Instead, he felt complicated. This was exactly what he'd been afraid of, that once Nina became Serafina again, she'd try to pay him off, to reduce his kindness to a transaction that could be balanced with money. But reading the letter again, Tommy realized that wasn't what she was doing. She wasn't paying him for services rendered. She was doing what he'd done for her, making sure someone she cared about didn't have to struggle unnecessarily. He'd shared his food and bought her clothes not as payment but as care. She was doing the same thing, just with resources that matched her scale rather than his. Tommy folded the letter carefully and put it back in the envelope. Then he looked up at his ceiling, which was indeed perfectly repaired, and smiled. Thanks, Nina, he said to the empty apartment. Now go save your empire. And remember what I told you, kindness isn't weakness. Somewhere in space, Tommy hoped, Queen Serafina was listening. And he hoped she'd remember that the janitor who'd saved her life believed she could be more than what tradition demanded. That she could be the kind of ruler who cared about her people, not just controlled them. It was probably naive. It was definitely idealistic. But Tommy had learned something too in that week with Nina. Sometimes idealism was exactly what the universe needed. Even if it came from a minimum-wage janitor who'd never expected to change anything beyond a mopped floor. 6 months passed before Tommy saw Nina again. In that time, his life had changed in small but significant ways. He'd paid off debts he'd been carrying for years. He'd gotten his teeth fixed, something he'd been putting off because dental work was expensive. He'd bought a used car so he didn't have to walk everywhere. But he'd kept his job at the diner, kept his apartment, kept living mostly the same life he'd always lived. His boss had been confused when Tommy came back to work the day after Serafina left, insisting he didn't need the year of paid leave that some fancy lawyer had arranged. "You already got the money," his boss had said. "Why keep mopping floors?" "Because it's my job," Tommy had replied simply. "And I'm good at it." What Tommy didn't tell anyone was that he'd been following the news from space. Earth's first contact with alien civilization had happened 3 months ago, when a massive ship had appeared in orbit and broadcast a message in perfect English. Queen Serafina of the Celestial Imperium had addressed the people of Earth, explaining that their world was now under her protection due to a debt of honor to one of their citizens. The media had gone absolutely insane trying to figure out who that citizen was. Tommy had watched the speculation from his apartment, amused at how far off most of the guesses were. Politicians, billionaires, scientists, everyone assumed it had to be someone important. Nobody thought to look at a night shift janitor in a small town. The news from the Celestial Imperium had been dramatic. Serafina had retaken her throne in what reports called a bloodless coup, surrounding the capital with loyal forces and giving her cousin Aldrich a choice: surrender and face trial, or fight and condemn thousands to death. Aldrich had surrendered, and Serafina had done something unprecedented: she'd given him a public trial instead of a quiet execution. The trial had been broadcast across her empire, and Tommy had watched a pirated stream on his laptop. He'd barely recognized Nina. She'd sat on her throne wearing elaborate robes, her violet eyes hard and commanding, as evidence of Aldrich's crimes was presented. But when it came time for sentencing, she'd done something that shocked her entire civilization. Instead of execution, she'd sentenced Aldrich to exile and service. He would spend the rest of his life working in the poorest regions of the empire, helping to build infrastructure and improve lives, under constant supervision. "Let him see the people he dismissed as unimportant," Serafina had said. "Let him learn that a ruler's duty is to serve, not to dominate." The verdict had been controversial, but it had also been a statement. Serafina was going to rule differently than any celestial monarch before her. And she had. Over the following months, news filtered down to Earth about the changes happening in the Imperium. Policies focused on welfare and education. Resources redirected from military expansion to infrastructure and healthcare. Open dialogue with species the Celestials had previously conquered or dominated. Her advisors had apparently fought her every step of the way. Tommy had read translated reports of Imperial Council meetings where nobles argued that she was weakening the Empire, making them vulnerable, abandoning traditions that had stood for millennia. But Serafina had held firm, and slowly, the results started speaking for themselves. Rebellion on conquered worlds decreased dramatically when those worlds were given genuine representation and care. The economy stabilized as trade replaced tribute. Citizens who had simply endured their government began to actively support it. The Celestial Imperium was transforming from a conquering force into something closer to a federation. Not everyone was happy. There had been resistance, even attempts at rebellion from traditionalist factions. But Serafina had navigated it all with a combination of firm authority and genuine compassion that, according to analysts, was completely unprecedented in celestial history. Tommy had watched it all from his apartment, proud and a little amazed. She'd actually done it. She'd remembered. Then, on a quiet Tuesday night at 2 a.m., Tommy was mopping the diner parking lot when a familiar shimmer appeared in the air. A ship materialized, not huge like the ones in the news reports, but small and sleek. A door opened, and Serafina stepped out, dressed in simple clothes that looked almost human. Tommy stared at her, his mop forgotten in his hands. She looked different, more confident, more settled in herself. The scared girl who'd crashed in the field was gone. But when she smiled at him, it was Nina's smile, warm and genuine. "Hi, Tommy," she said. "You came back," Tommy said stupidly. "I promised I would." She walked toward him, and Tommy noticed she didn't have any guards with her. "I told my security detail I was visiting a friend and didn't need an armed escort. They were very upset with me." "You're the queen," Tommy pointed out. "You can do what you want." "That is exactly what I told them," Serafina laughed. They were not convinced. But I insisted. This visit is personal, not official. They stood there in the parking lot, an alien queen and a janitor, just looking at each other. Finally, Tommy said, I've been watching the news. You've been busy. Busy is an understatement, Seraphina said. I have been fighting a battle every single day against people who think I am destroying everything our empire stands for. But Tommy. Her expression became intense. It is working. My people are happier. Worlds that hated us are becoming partners. My empire is stronger than it has ever been, not because of fear, but because of genuine loyalty. I'm proud of you, Tommy said, and meant it. Seraphina's eyes became suspiciously bright. That means more to me than you know. But I did not come just to give you updates you could read in news reports. I came to ask you something. Okay, Tommy said cautiously. I need an advisor, Seraphina said. Someone who will tell me the truth. Someone who sees people as people, not as assets or threats or political tools. Someone who understands what it means to care for others without expecting anything in return. I need you, Tommy. Tommy had been expecting this. He'd played this conversation out in his head a dozen times over the past 6 months. Nina, we talked about this. I'm not qualified by traditional standards, I know, Seraphina interrupted. You have no political training, no military background, no experience in governance. My council reminded me of this repeatedly when I told them I wanted to offer you a position. But you have something none of them have, wisdom that comes from living a life where kindness matters because resources are scarce, where helping someone might cost you significantly, where you see people being overlooked and dismissed and you choose to notice them anyway. She stepped closer. I am not asking you to run military campaigns or negotiate trade agreements. I have people for that. I am asking you to be my conscience. To remind me, when I am making decisions that affect billions, that those billions are all individuals who deserve to be cared for. To tell me when I am falling back into old patterns of domination instead of service. To keep me honest. Tommy looked at this powerful being who ruled hundreds of worlds and somehow thought a janitor from Earth had anything valuable to offer. You're serious. Completely serious. I have already had your security clearance processed. I have prepared quarters for you on my flagship that include a window that shows your Earth at all times, in case you get homesick. I have ensured you can return to visit your home planet whenever you wish. I am not asking you to abandon your life, Tommy. I am asking you to expand it. To help me build an empire that is worthy of the kindness you showed me. And if I say no? Seraphina smiled sadly. Then I will be disappointed, but I will understand. I will continue trying to rule with compassion, though it will be harder without your voice reminding me why it matters. And I will still visit you when I can, because you are my friend, and I do not have many of those. Tommy looked down at his mop, at the parking lot he'd been cleaning for 3 years, at the diner where he'd worked since he was 23. His life was here, small and simple and safe. But it was also lonely, predictable, going nowhere in particular. Then he looked at Seraphina, at this young woman who'd crashed in a field 6 months ago and learned about kindness from someone who had nothing to offer but himself. She was trying to change an empire, trying to make billions of lives better, and she wanted his help. I don't have any fancy clothes, Tommy said. Seraphina's face lit up. Is that a yes? I don't know anything about space or aliens or empire politics. That is actually an advantage, Seraphina said, bouncing slightly with excitement. You will ask questions no one else thinks to ask. I'll probably say something stupid and offend some important alien ambassador. I will protect you from diplomatic incidents, Seraphina promised. Tommy, is this a yes? Tommy set down his mop. Yeah, it's a yes. But I need 2 weeks to quit my job properly and settle my affairs. And I want to be able to come back to Earth whenever I want. This is my home. Done and done, Seraphina said immediately. Take a month if you need it. Take whatever time you need. She pulled out a small device and handed it to Tommy. This is a communication device. Press the blue symbol when you are ready, and I will send a ship for you. No rush. I have waited 6 months, I can wait a little longer. Tommy took the device, which was warm and smooth in his hand. Nina. Seraphina. I still don't understand why you want me. There have to be thousands of people more qualified. More qualified by traditional metrics, Seraphina agreed. But you saved my life when I was just a stranger who needed help. You shared your food when you barely had enough for yourself. You stood against assassins with only a baseball bat because you refused to let anyone hurt someone under your protection. That is not qualification, Tommy. That is character. And character is what I need most. 2 weeks later, Tommy Rivera stood in his empty apartment, looking around one last time. He'd sold most of his furniture, put a few personal items in storage, and said goodbye to the few people he knew well enough to say goodbye to. His boss at the diner had been shocked but supportive, and had promised Tommy his job back if things didn't work out in space. Tommy pressed the blue symbol on the communication device, and within minutes, a ship appeared outside his window. He grabbed his duffel bag, everything he was bringing with him fit in one bag, and walked toward the door. Then he paused and looked back at the couch where Nina had slept for a week, the kitchen where he'd taught her to make coffee, the window where they'd looked at stars together. Here goes nothing, Tommy said to the empty room. The ship took him up to Serafina's flagship, a vessel so enormous that Tommy's entire town could have fit inside it several times over. He was greeted by staff who bowed to him, actually bowed, which made him incredibly uncomfortable, and shown to quarters that were bigger than his apartment had been. But the best part was the window. An entire wall of his quarters was transparent, showing Earth floating in space below, blue and beautiful and home. Serafina found him there an hour later, just staring at his planet. Tommy, she said softly. Thank you for coming. Thank you for asking, Tommy replied. So, what now? What does an advisor to an alien queen actually do? Right now. Serafina smiled. Right now, you come to a council meeting where my generals want to respond to an insurgency on a border world with military force, and you remind them that maybe they should try talking to the insurgents first and addressing their grievances. You make them see these people as individuals who deserve to be heard, not just problems to be eliminated. That sounds terrifying, Tommy admitted. It is, Serafina agreed. But you will do it anyway, because that is who you are. The person who helps even when it is scary, even when it is hard, even when it would be easier to look away. And so Tommy Rivera, former night shift janitor, became an advisor to the Queen of the Celestial Imperium. He attended council meetings where he asked questions that made generals uncomfortable and nobles angry. He visited worlds and talked to ordinary citizens, then brought their concerns directly to Serafina. He reminded her, over and over, that power meant nothing without compassion. The traditionalists hated him. The nobles thought he was beneath them. The military considered him a nuisance. But Serafina valued his input more than all of them, and slowly, others began to see why. Earth, meanwhile, prospered under celestial protection. The Imperium shared technology, open trade, invited human representatives to join their council. First contact, which could have been hostile or exploitative, became the beginning of genuine partnership. Years later, when historians studied the transformation of the Celestial Imperium from conquering empire to cooperative federation, they traced it back to one pivotal moment, when Queen Serafina crashed on Earth and met a janitor who taught her that true strength wasn't about conquest or control, but about simple kindness offered without expectation of reward. Tommy never got used to being important. He still thought of himself as just a guy who mopped floors, who'd helped someone in need and somehow ended up advising an empire. But when he looked at the changes Serafina was making, the lives being improved, the peace being built, the compassion being valued, he felt something he'd never felt before. Pride. Purpose. The sense that his life mattered. And every few months, when the weight of empire business became too much, Serafina would send Tommy back to Earth for a visit. He'd go to the diner where he used to work, order coffee, and talk to his old boss about simple things like weather and sports. Then he'd return to space, to his quarters with the window showing Earth, and continue helping an alien queen build an empire worth believing in. Because that's what you did when someone needed help. Even when that someone was trying to change the universe. You helped. Always,